You ever notice how silence isn't really silent? Not the gentle quiet of a library or the respectful hush of snowfall, but the real silence? The kind that settles after the world has held its breath for too long? It's not empty. It's full. Full of things you can't quite hear, pressures you can't quite place, a low, insistent hum that vibrates in the marrow of your bones. Like the air itself is holding something back. Like the silence is just a thin skin stretched toward over a roaring void, and any second, it might split. That's the silence that filled my grandfather's cabin after the power went out. Not just the absence of the fridge grumble or the furnace's sigh. This was deeper, absolute. It pressed in from the ancient, resin-scented logs, from the snow drifts piled high against the windows like frozen waves, from the vast, indifferent pine forest crowding the ridgeline outside. It was a silence with weight. It settled on my chest like a stone, making each breath a conscious effort, a small rebellion against the suffocating stillness. I'd come up here, fleeing the city's relentless noise, the traffic snarl, the neighbors' bass bleeding through the walls, the endless, frantic pinging of digital lives, seeking solace in the mountain's quiet embrace. A cliché, I know, the burnt-out right to seeking inspiration in isolation. What a cosmic joke that turned out to be. I didn't find quiet. I found the static. It started subtly, almost beneath notice. Like the faintest tinnitus, a high-pitched whine at the very edge of perception. I'd shake my head, rub my ears, blame it on the altitude or the lingering echo of city life. But it persisted, grew, not louder, exactly, but denser. It wasn't a sound you heard with your ears alone. You felt it, in your teeth, in the roots of your hair. It vibrated under your skin, a constant, unsettling thrumming. It was a sound of absence given form, the sound of nothing vibrating at a frequency just beyond human tolerance. It wasn't white noise, that comforting hiss of emptiness. This was different, darker. It felt hungry, like it wasn't just sound, but a substance, an invasive presence seeping through the cracks in reality. The first time it truly manifested beyond the hum was the third night. The blizzard had howled for 2 days straight, a furious beast throwing itself against the cabin, cutting me off completely. The world shrank to the flickering circle of kerosene lamplight, the crackle of the wood stove, and that deepening static. I was reading by the lamplight, or trying to. The words swam on the page, refusing to cohere, their meaning dissolving under pressure building inside my skull. The static wasn't just outside anymore. It was in me, a pressure behind my eyes, a tightness in my throat. I looked up, my gaze drawn unwillingly to the large, black rectangle of the window. Beyond the frost feathers etching the glass, only the swirling, impenetrable white of the storm. And yet, movement, not in the snow, but within the glass itself. A slow, viscous shifting in the darkness, like oil swirling in water, but soundless, utterly soundless against the backdrop of the static's thrum. My breath hitched, fogging the cold pain for a second. I wiped it away with a trembling hand. The movement stopped. The window was just black again, reflecting the small, pathetic glow of my lamp. Just my eyes playing tricks. I told myself, isolation, exhaustion, the mind inventing phantoms to fill the sensory void. A perfectly rational explanation. It tasted like ash in my mouth, because the feeling didn't go away. The feeling of being watched from that absolute darkness, from that space within the glass. Not from outside, from within the boundary itself. Sleep became impossible. The static grew heavier, a physical pressure on my eardrums, a buzzing in my jaw. It wasn't just auditory now. It was tactile. I could feel it crawling on my skin, a million invisible insects. I'd lie rigid in the narrow bunk, buried under wool blankets that felt suddenly thin and inadequate, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams swallowed by shadow. The kerosene lamp burned low, casting long, grotesque shapes that danced and stretched in the corners. And the shadows, they weren't right. They didn't just absorb light. They seemed to possess a density, a presence of their own, a thickness that the lamplight couldn't penetrate. Sometimes, in the periphery of my vision, they seemed to ripple, to bulge slightly, as if something immense and shapeless was pressing against the fragile fabric of the dim light, testing its strength. One night, driven half-mad by the relentless pressure in the shadows that seemed to breathe, I stumbled towards a small bathroom. The cabin was a single room, the bathroom a closet-sized addition with a plywood door that never quite latched properly. I pushed it open. The darkness inside was absolute, deeper than night, deeper than space. It felt solid. I fumbled for the wall switch, knowing the power was out, a pointless reflex. My fingers brushed the cold plastic, and in that instant, the static surged. Not a sound, but a violent, silent concussion in the air, a pressure wave that slammed into my chest, knocking the breath from my lungs. It felt like being submerged in freezing mud. And within that absolute, suffocating blackness of the bathroom doorway, 2 points of light ignited. Not light, absence. Pinpricks of perfect, starless void, darker than the surrounding dark. They held no reflection, no depth, just emptiness. Staring, I stumbled backwards, a choked gasp tearing from my throat. My heel caught on the braided rug, and I went down hard, my elbow cracking against the unforgiving plank floor. Pain flayed, sharp and real, a blessed anchor. I scrambled crab-like away from that doorway, my back hitting the cold iron of the wood stove. The kerosene lamp flickered violently, threatening to snuff out. I stared, wide-eyed, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Back at the bathroom, the door was swinging slightly on its hinges. The darkness within was just dark, normal dark. The pinpricks of void were gone. Had they ever been there? The pain in my elbow throbbed, insistent, undeniable. But the terror that had flooded me, the sheer, primal wrongness of those eyes, that was real, that was carved into my bones. The static became my constant companion, my jailer, my torturer. It wasn't just a sound or a feeling anymore. It was an environment. The air itself felt thick with it, resistant to movement, heavy to breathe. Light seemed to struggle against it, the kerosene lamp's glow barely reaching a few feet before being swallowed by the oppressive gloom. Sounds from outside, the groan of snow-laden branches, the wind's dying moan as the blizzard finally passed, were muffled, distant, as if heard through layers of wet felt. But the sounds inside, they became terrifyingly sharp. The creak of a timber settling was a gunshot. The skitter of a mouse, or what I desperately hoped was a mouse, in the wall was the scrabbling claws of something much larger, trapped just out of sight. My own heartbeat was a frantic drum solo in the suffocating quiet, each thud echoing the insistent thrum of the static. I tried to write. Words were my armor, my understanding. I opened my laptop, its screen a harsh, artificial beacon in the gloom. The battery icon glowed a weak yellow. I stared at the blank document, the cursor blinking with metronome regularity. Blink, blink, blink. The rhythm seemed to sync with the static's pulse. I typed a sentence. The silence here has teeth. The letters looked alien, meaningless scratches on a field of white. I deleted it. Tried again. Something is wrong with the dark. As soon as I typed it, the kerosene lamp flickered violently again. The shadows surged toward me, stretching long fingers across the floor. I slammed the laptop shut. The screen's light vanished, plunging me back into the fragile sanctuary of the lamplight. My own words felt like an invocation, a dangerous acknowledgement. The days bled into nights, indistinguishable under the perpetual twilight gloom inside the cabin and the oppressive weight pressing down. Hunger was a distant memory, replaced by a gnawing dread that filled my stomach with cold lead. Thirst was a dry rasp in my throat, ignored. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. I existed in a state of hyper-alert exhaustion, every nerve frayed raw, jumping at the slightest shift in the pressure, the faintest new texture in the static's endless drone. I started seeing things in the grain of the wood walls. Faces, twisted in silent screams, emerging from the knots and whirls only to dissolve when I looked directly at them. Out of the corner of my eye, shapes moved, tall, impossibly thin silhouettes that flickered at the edge of vision, always retreating into the deeper shadows when I turned. Were they in the cabin? Or were they in the static itself, projected onto the fragile screen of my perception? The worst was a sense of imminence, a terrible, suffocating certainty that something was about to happen, that the fragile barrier holding back whatever dwelt within the static was wearing thin, that the pressure building inside my head, inside the very walls, was reaching a critical mass. It was a physical sensation, like the air before a lightning strike, thick with potential energy, heavy with the promise of violence. My skin crawled constantly. My scalp felt too tight. I found myself holding my breath for long stretches, listening, always listening, for the moment the silence finally ripped. It happened on the 7th night, or maybe the 10th. Time had lost all meaning. The kerosene was running low. The lamp burned dimmer, its circle of light shrinking, surrendering more territory to the encroaching shadows. The static was no longer a hum. It was a roar, a silent, crushing roar that filled my skull, vibrating my teeth, making my vision blur. It felt like my head was packed with wet sand under immense pressure. I sat huddled on the floor by the stove, my back pressed against its residual warmth, knees drawn to my chest. I couldn't stand the bunk anymore, its exposure. The floor felt marginally safer, closer to the solid earth. Foolish. I was staring at the bathroom door. It stood slightly ajar, as it always did. The darkness beyond was a solid wall. And then, movement. Not the imagined ripples of before. This was deliberate. A slow, sinuous shifting within the darkness itself. Like a great serpent coiling in the void. The static roared in my ears, a silent scream of pressure. The 2 points of void appeared again. The eyes. They weren't distant pinpricks this time. They were close, just beyond the doorway. And they weren't expressionless. They held awareness, a cold, ancient, utterly alien intelligence. Looking at me, seeing me, a whimper escaped my lips, instantly swallowed by the crushing silence. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Terror, pure and icy, locked my muscles rigid. The eyes held mine. There was no malice in them, not in any way I could comprehend. No anger, just observation. A terrifying, indifferent curiosity, like a scientist observing an insect trapped in amber. And beneath that, a vast, yawning hunger. Not for flesh, but for something else. For substance. For reality. For the quiet hum of existence itself. The pressure intensified. It wasn't just in my head now. It was in the room. The air grew thick, viscous. Breathing became laborious, like sucking mud through a straw. The kerosene lamp's flame shrank to a desperate blue bead, then guttered wildly. Shadows lunged forward, no longer shapes but pools of absolute blackness spreading across the floorboards like spilled ink. They moved with purpose, flowing towards me. The grain of the wood on the walls writhed. The faces no longer illusions but contorted masks of purest agony, mouths open in silent, endless screams that resonated with the silent roar of the static. The temperature plummeted. My breath plumed thickly in the suddenly frigid air. Frost crackled audibly across the window panes, intricate, impossible patterns blooming in seconds. The eyes in the doorway didn't move. They remained fixed on me, but the darkness around them, it pulsed. It bulged inward, towards a cabin, towards me. It wasn't coming through the doorway. The doorway was becoming part of it. The wood of the door frame seemed to warp, to soften at the edges, losing definition, melting into the encroaching void. The static wasn't just sound or pressure anymore. It was a presence, a vast, incomprehensible entity pressing its consciousness against the flimsy membrane of my world. I could feel its mind, cold, vast, utterly alien, thoughts like glacier grinding, concepts that shattered human understanding. It wasn't evil. It was beyond such petty distinctions. It simply was. And it was hungry. Hungry for the warmth, the light, the fragile spark of sentience that cowered before it. Hungry for the noise of existence to cease, leaving only its own perfect, crushing silence. A strangled sob tore from my throat. The sound was shockingly loud in the suffocating quiet, a tiny defiance against the overwhelming pressure. The eyes shifted, focused. The hunger intensified, a psychic wave that crashed over me, threatening to extinguish my consciousness. The shadows pooling at my feet grew colder, leaching the heat from my body. They began to climb, not like liquid, but like a creeping stain, a corruption spreading up my legs. Where they touched, sensation died. Not numbness, but a terrifying nothingness, an absence of feeling, of self. It was being erased, piece by piece, consumed by the hungry dark. No, the thought was a spark in the freezing void of my terror. Not like this, not swallowed whole by the silence. With a surge of adrenaline born of primal desperation, I did the only thing I could think of, I lunged, not away from the creeping shadows, not towards a door, a futile gesture, but towards a wood stove. The fire inside had died to embers hours ago, but the iron was still warm. My hand closed around the heavy, cast-iron poker leaning against it. It was cold, but solid, real, an anchor. I swung it wildly, not at the shadows. How do you hit absence? Not at the eyes in the void, but at the kerosene lamp sitting precariously on the small table beside the stove. The poker connected with a sickening crunch of glass and metal. The small reservoir shattered. Kerosene, smelling sharp and acrid, sprayed out in a wide arc, and the tiny, guttering flame. The world exploded. No, not exploded. Ignited. The spilled kerosene caught with a terrifying whoosh. A wave of heat and blinding yellow light slammed outward, banishing the encroaching shadows instantly. The sudden, violent brightness was a physical blow after days of gloom. The silent roar of the static seemed to shriek, a soundless vibration of pure rage and violation. The pressure in the room fluctuated wildly, like a decompression. The eyes in the bathroom doorway flared with impossible darkness, then vanished, swallowed by the sudden, furious light. The writhing faces in the wood grain froze, their silent screams momentarily illuminated before seeming to retreat back into timber. The creeping cold shadow stain on my legs recoiled, dissipating like smoke in a gale. But it was a desperate, fleeting victory. The fire was uncontrolled. Hungry in its own right, it raced across the spilled fuel, licking up the leg of the wooden table, devouring the dry, old braided rug. Flames roared, greedy and bright, casting frantic, dancing shadows that were merely shadows again, not sentient darkness. Heat washed over me, intense and terrifying after the unnatural cold. The crackle and roar of the fire was a shocking cacophony, a brutal assault on ears accustomed only to the crushing static. Yet, beneath the fire's fury, the static remained, thrumming, angry, repelled but not banished, a constant, vibrating pressure beneath the world of heat and light. I scrambled back, coughing as smoke began to fill the small cabin, thick and black. The fire was spreading with terrifying speed, fueled by the old, dry wood in the cabin's sparse furnishings. The light was intense, but it was a light of destruction. It pushed back the entity in the static, yes, but it was also consuming my only shelter, my fragile refuge against the vast, snowy wilderness outside, and the deeper, colder wilderness pressing in. The choice was horrifying, burn or be consumed by the silent dark. The fire roared, the heat blistering my skin. Smoke stung my eyes, clawed at my lungs. The cabin was becoming an oven. Through watering eyes, I saw the bathroom doorway. It was just a doorway again, leading to a small, dark room. No eyes, no pulsing void. The fire hadn't reached it yet. Instinct took over. Survival. I grabbed a heavy wool blanket from bunk, wrapped it around my head and shoulders, and ran, not towards a main door blocked by fire already licking up the wall beside it, but through the bathroom doorway. I slammed the flimsy plywood door shut behind me. The small room was thick with smoke already seeping under the door, but the fire wasn't in here yet. The window, small, high, crusted with ice and snow on the outside. I shoved the blanket aside, grabbed a small wooden stool, and smashed it against the glass. It took 3 desperate blows before it shattered outward. Frigid night air, clean and shocking, rushed in, momentarily clearing the smoke. I kicked out the remaining shards of glass, ignoring the cuts on my hands. The opening was small, barely big enough to squeeze through. Outside, the world was a monochrome landscape under a full moon, snow gleaming like bone, the forest a wall of black sentinels. I looked back. Orange light flickered violently under the bathroom door. Smoke poured through the gap. The roar of the fire was muffled by the door, but I could feel its heat building. And beneath it, the static, waiting, pressing against the thin barrier of wood and flame. The eyes. I couldn't see them, but I felt them, watching, patient, knowing the fire couldn't last, knowing the cold and the silence outside were its domain. With a final surge of terror-fueled strength, I hauled myself up and through the narrow window, scraping skin on the jagged edges, landing in a deep drift of snow outside. The cold was a physical shock, breathtaking after the inferno inside. I scrambled away from the cabin, sinking thigh deep in the snow, turning back just as flames burst through the bathroom window I'd just escaped, licking hungrily at the log wall. The cabin was fully ablaze now, a roaring pyre against a vast, indifferent night. Light and heat radiated out, pushing back the moonlit shadows, casting long, dancing specters on the snow. It was terrifyingly beautiful, and utterly inadequate, because as I stood there, shivering violently, smoke stinging my lungs, watching my refuge, my prison, burn, I felt it. The static. It hadn't lessened. It hadn't gone away with the fire or the escape. It was here, out in the open, under the vast, star-flecked sky. It vibrated in the frigid air. It hummed in the deep snow beneath my boots. It resonated in the towering pines, their branches heavy with snow, standing like silent witnesses. The fire's roar was loud, but it felt small, temporary, against the immense, crushing silence of the mountains and the ancient forest. A silence that wasn't empty. A silence that was a canvas upon which the static painted its hungry presence. The fire pushed the entity back, forced it to retreat from the immediate intensity of light and heat. But out here, the static was a baseline. The fire was the anomaly, a temporary scream in an ocean of silence. And the ocean was deep, impossibly deep. I could feel the vastness of it pressing down. The trees weren't just trees. There were pillars holding up a sky that felt suddenly thin, fragile. The moon's light seemed cold, clinical, illuminating nothing of comfort, only the sheer scale of the wilderness I was stranded in. Stranded with it. I turned away from the burning cabin, the heat warming one side of my face, the freezing cold biting the other. I looked out into the forest. The path back to the main road was miles away, buried under feet of snow, invisible in the moonlit expanse. And the shadows between the trees, they weren't just dark. They were thick, impenetrable. They seemed to drink the moonlight. And within those shadows, I saw movement. Not animals. Shapes. Tall, impossibly attenuated silhouettes, blacker than surrounding darkness, flickering at the edge of perception. Standing still, watching the fire, watching me. Were they drawn by the light? Or had they always been there, just beyond the edge of sight, waiting within the static? The fire crackled and roared, a defiant beacon. But its light only reached so far. Beyond its circle, the world belonged to the static, to the silence that wasn't silent, to the cold that wasn't just temperature, to the things that moved in the spaces between the trees, in the spaces within the shadows, in the spaces between the beats of my own terrified heart. The fire was dying fuel. The cold was eternal. The static was forever. I started walking, not towards the road. That felt like a fool's errand, a path leading only deeper into its domain. I walked parallel to the tree line, staying just within the rapidly diminishing circle of the fire's light and heat, my eyes fixed on the snow ahead, refusing to look directly at the flickering shapes in the forest periphery. Every crunch of snow under my boots seemed obscenely loud, a beacon in the crushing silence. The static vibrated in my bones, a constant reminder. The pressure was still there, a weight on my soul. The firelight at my back was warm, but it felt like the last ember of a dying world. Ahead, only moonlit snow and the waiting trees, their shadows deep and hungry. I walked, the cold bit deeper. The firelight grew smaller behind me. The static grew louder inside me. And the shapes, they kept pace. Just beyond the light, just beyond sight, waiting for the fire to die, waiting for the warmth to fade, waiting for the silence to become absolute once more. Because the silence isn't empty. It's full of the static. And the static has teeth. It has eyes. And it's always hungry. You can run from the fire. You can't run from the weight of the silence. You carry it with you. You carry it inside. The static is a void between the stars, the silent before the scream, the cold at the heart of everything. And it knows you're here. It knows you're afraid. And it's so very, very patient. The fire was just an interruption, a brief, flickering defiance. Now there's only the walk, the cold, the moon, the trees, the shadows that move when you don't look directly at them, and the endless, crushing, hungry weight of the static. It's not outside anymore. It never really was. It's in the marrow. It's in the breath that plumes white in the air and vanishes. It's the silence after the last note fades. Forever, I keep walking. The snow crunches, the cold bites, the static hums, and the shadows, they follow. They always follow. They are the static, and the static is me. It's everything. It's the only truth left under this indifferent moon. The fire is gone now. Only embers, only memory, only the static remains. Heavy, endless, hungry, and it's getting closer, always closer. Can you feel it? That pressure? That hum deep in your bones? That's the weight. That's the static. And it knows your name. It knows where you are. It's always known. It was just waiting for you to be quiet enough to listen.